Welcome to the Higher Ed Geek Podcast, where we explore the impact of EdTech on the student experience with engaging, fun, and relevant conversations that honor the wide range of work happening all across the higher ed ecosystem. I'm your host, Dustin Ramsdell. I've been working in and around higher ed for the past decade, focused on student support and digital experience. Join me every week for discussions with some of the best minds in education technology who'll be bringing you their perspectives on how digital transformation is reshaping the way we recruit, engage, and graduate learners. You'll hear firsthand accounts of how institutional leaders are developing their strategy, as well as get deeper on the stories of how these EdTech tools are being built to foster better student outcomes. With that, let's get to today's episode. Welcome back, everyone, for another bonus live episode of the Higher Ed Geek Podcast, recorded here at the eduWeb Summit in beautiful Orlando. So this is our second interview that we're doing here at the event with Nathan from Prospectus Plus. So Nathan, if you want to briefly introduce yourself and kind of your background, and then explain a little bit about what Prospectus Plus does.
Thanks, Dustin. Yeah, I'm Nathan. I'm the co-founder of Prospectus Plus. My background, for the last 17 years, I've been working in higher ed digital. In the UK, I ran an agency that created flagship websites for universities and further education institutions. We were solving a lot of the same problems over and over again, and we wanted to get into sort of a product space. And in the UK, we call them prospectuses. Over here, you would call them view books or handbooks, maybe. And that's the space that we're in today, trying to convert the traditionally printed view book into the digital alternative.
Well, yeah, and we spoke before we jumped on recording here, because I was just curious about what you all are doing and the idea of, like, you know, there was sort of a digital migration with view books, but it was just kind of a static PDF someone would download and kind of just look at. And, you know, I guess that was all well and good for a time, but we can certainly now do a lot better. So if you want to kind of, I guess, use, like, you know, sort of what's bringing you to the summit, what are the conversations you're having, the questions you're getting, or what are you kind of excited to learn more about as you're kind of, you know, showing off your amazing solution, because I was very excited to kind of have this conversation. It feels like a kind of cool, unique, novel thing. So I guess as a way to kind of, you know, talk more about kind of, you know, the digital view books and kind of your approach to it, talk a little bit about kind of just your presence here on the first full day of the summit and kind of the conversations you're having.
Yeah, I mean, it's been amazing to be here and amazing to kind of bring our solution to the US. The view book, I think, is such a missed opportunity, I think, for so many different people across universities, whether it's marketing, admissions, alumni, recruitment. All of these different people can really take advantage. And you are right, like, the prospectus has kind of gone digital in the past couple of years, probably since COVID, really. But the predominant format is a PDF. And it actually harks back to something about a decade ago. I was working with a university. We put together a printed prospectus for them. And at the end of it, they said, okay, well, we need to ship some of these out to India. And this was the heyday of print. We'd done a hardback bound book, you know. And of course, if you do the postage calculation on some hardback books across an ocean to India, it's not pretty. So they said, well, we can't afford that, so we're not going to do that. We'll do something digital. And I got really excited because, as chief nerd, that's an incredibly exciting prospect. Then they just said something that really just killed me, which was, well, can you just export it as a PDF and we'll deal with that? And that's the conversation that's been niggling away at me for 10 years, thinking there has to be a better way. Because, yes, PDFs get the information across, but do they do the job? And I don't think they do. I think we've got a market where young people are demanding more and more from institutions. They want personalization. They want more relevant information. They want it in a format that they're used to. And PDFs, they're not the solution. So we created something that can be personalized, that is trackable, that feels native, a true digital experience for them. And I think that really speaks to not only the audience in terms of what they want, but also speaks to our audience of universities and schools, because it gives them the tools to do their best work.
Well, I guess as a brief follow-up to that, because I'm always kind of curious sometimes, like, there's so much, you know, cool stuff here. And I feel like I've always kind of just, like, deluged myself with of just sort of like, oh, like what's happening? I always want to go to like every table at every, convention that I'm at on like the exhibit floor and everything. Do you feel like culturally now, and I guess it probably is again, like the sort of watershed moment of like where you kind of tipped over in terms of the majority of, a view book at a U.S. institution was probably at least available digitally. Yeah. Maybe it's just like a static PDF.
Yeah.
Do you feel like culturally now people are like more understanding or aware or, because I guess that idea would be that idea of, there's a better way, but then you have to like convince people where it's like, oh, I'm sure that would take so long. And so like, do you feel like culturally that you're seeing a lot more people kind of get the concept or be accepting, and it's just a matter of like, how are we going to kind of approach it?
100%. I've been doing talks on this topic for 5 years now. And I remember 5 years ago, I was in a room and I would say like draw a line down the middle. It was worse. People were coming up to me saying, this will never take off. This is crazy. You can never take my print from my prized dead hands, all this sort of stuff. And actually year on year, I do more and more talks. And each time the needle moves. It's in terms of acceptance, the needle moves. At the same time, there are tons of reports out there that are showing that needle is also moving from the audience perspective as well. I'm not here advocating for the death of print. Don't get me wrong. I trained as a print designer many moons ago, right? And I think there's a right time and a right place for it. It's fantastic. But equally, the latest report that we saw showed that students are now 2.6 times more likely to prefer a personalized digital view book over a static printed one. These are not small numbers at this point. And I think, like you say, culturally, there is an expectation that universities' digital experiences should at least be on par with what we're seeing out in the private sector.
Right.
And I think that's a tough question that a lot of universities need to answer.
Well, yeah, I guess where my mind goes, like having those sort of like conversations with folks is the idea of acknowledging that it's like now even more so, I guess it's sort of like, kind of passing the Rubicon is the idea of like, like the demand from the end user, but then also kind of culturally at an institution that, is, this venerable institution, whatever, is just sort of like recognizing maybe they're getting a lot of that feedback, but then like, they've maybe had some exposure to these sort of things somewhere else. And it's like, oh, maybe we could use that for this, that, the other, because I'm even also thinking, you made passing mention, I guess I'll use this to kind of keep moving the conversation forward, is the idea of like, certainly I think a lot of institutions do, like if it's a view book and kind of called that, is for prospective students to kind of, ingratiate them to the institution. Yeah. But like there is so much around, at institutions, they'll put out their like institutional magazine or an alumni magazine or whatever else. And just the idea that like, certainly with alumni, you're going to have people across many generations. They might prefer, an opt-in one way or the other to get one. But I think giving people an option and giving people something that like, just aligns with their needs or preferences or whatever else, and just being able to reach and engage and know that more, definitively versus like, oh, we mail out the, alumni magazine. Everybody says they love it, but like, that idea of when you're sort of like releasing something, if you like, even just like that static PDF, they download it and you're like, hope they liked it, hope they clicked on stuff or whatever, and you can maybe try to, draw a sort of zigzaggy dotted line or whatever, but I guess it's even that idea. Maybe just speak a little bit to sort of the, we have kind of a broad audience on the show, like to all those different use cases, I guess, because even just that vernacular, maybe again, just sort of culturally, people might be like, oh, okay, well, a view book's just for one particular audience. Sure. It's just an idea of like leveraging really, kind of modern, sophisticated technology for a variety of kind of purposes and kind of why that's important, like the impacts maybe you're seeing in kind of those different use cases.
And I think there's kind of this perfect storm of a couple of different conversations that crop up in higher ed marketing so often, right? There is this notion of, yes, being able to pass information from A to B, just digital publication, right? And making that look really attractive. That can be difficult on the web sometimes. So I think that's really important. There's also this notion of trackability, being able to report on ROI. We're all being tasked with kind of, doing more with less, but also needing to report on the successes. That can be so difficult with more traditional mediums. And I think there's all of this kind of combined creates, all of this combined really points us towards digital as being able to solve all of those problems. We all want to get information that is right for us. We all love personalized information. And I think that's so difficult to do in traditional media because of cost because of the medium itself. But again, with digital, it's so easy, and it's just being able to pull all of those things together in the right way to make it effective for everybody that's involved.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the big point too. Is like, the personalization piece, especially on like the prospective student side. I think it's like very crucial, and there's sort of like an urgency around it. You're trying to kind of compel them towards an action that's like a big, commitment, and have them feel very well informed and confident, in that decision. But I'm even, just across the board, I guess, just that idea that like, as an alumni, I may care more about sports than, when, those sort of things. Yeah. But then even on the other side, I guess, of a kind of the feedback loop, and just trying to kind of, honor all sides of the equation here of like, the end user and the, institutional leaders that are listening. The idea too, that you would know like, wow, people loved this article or whatever, a lot of people just really engage with a certain thing. And that a lot, just again, informs you to make being able to provide what your community is looking for on the front end, because they might be opting in to be like, I want to hear more about this, that, and the other, and I want it digitally, and I want, whatever. But then even then, like sometimes it's the idea of like, people voting with their digital feet, I guess, an idea of like, they're saying they want all these things, but like, they really loved this thing about like the impactful research that we're doing or something, so I guess, that kind of comes to my mind, the idea of like, you're informing the work that then is like, they're having better experience. You're doing kind of more optimized, kind of effective, efficient work.
I think the most effective teams that are using our platform are using it to drive insights. So they're using the analytics tools to look at what content is working for them, what content isn't working for them. They're able to generate these insights months and months in advance and be able to predict things off the back of it. So that it's pretty transformational, because people are starting to use it as part of their content strategy. And that's a really cool thing to see.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just really powerful. I guess it's just sort of like all the nuances of this. And I think, that's again why I was so excited about this, is sort of in so many ways it is evolving, the view book, this sort of loaded term, and just kind of trying to get, expand our minds, have a little bit more imagination, I guess, about just sort of like what is possible, and, how can this, provide a lot of ROI, and just in terms of like general satisfaction of alumni, prospective students and families, whatever else. But then like, like we are not just working off of like anecdotes and guesswork in terms of like what content should we be doing more of or less of, whatever. But that makes me think too, I guess, in terms of just sort of like, kind of insight strategy, and those sort of things. Is there anything that you can speak to on kind of the solution side, or maybe internally with just how your company's working? We just like to kind of talk about AI, kind of give it, sort of its, due diligence, and mention here anything you could speak to, I guess, of just how currently you and your team are kind of interfacing with AI at this moment.
I mean, we use it a lot internally to help make us a bit more productive, for sure. Well, actually, one of the coolest things that I've seen people use in our product. So we've got some integrations with tools like Power Automate, Zapier, all these sorts of things. And international student recruitment agents are a big audience for us. And the coolest integration I've seen is that somebody will work through with their students, and they'll be kind of collecting all of this personalized information. It's really cool. And when they hand over their data, that gets passed off to Zapier. Zapier then passes that off to ChatGPT. ChatGPT will then turn all of the personalization information that we've given to it into a wonderful high converting email, and it will drop it into that advisor's email software as a draft, ready to go. And now the international recruitment advisor goes back to their hotel room, reviews all of their drafts, maybe changes a few things here and there, for tone or whatever, and then presses send. And it's converted. The historical way of doing that would be capturing loads of information in a spreadsheet, going back to the hotel room, trying to remember what they've written down, spending hours and hours and hours typing up emails. We've transformed that into 30 minutes of work, away from like 4, 5, 6 hours worth. And I think that is really quite transformational for those sorts of people.
Yeah, because I think that's always the thing, is like, I think that's just been a conversation for so long, is like big data and analytics and whatever else. It's like, cool, great, awesome. Like, what are you doing with that information? Like you need to be able to kind of digest it and take action on it. And I think that is now kind of this like bridge, I think, for a lot of teams, especially if they're just kind of, less resourced, is that they can, reach that full potential a little bit easier as AI kind of gets more, ubiquitous and kind of plugged in. So as we wind down, kind of two final questions I'd like to ask folks, whether it's kind of expanding on something that we've already mentioned or anything else that you haven't mentioned. Any sort of trend lines that you've got kind of like that you're eyeing that you feel like are kind of like, on the horizon, going to be kind of coming our way soon, whether it's kind of related to your work specifically or just generally maybe for higher ed?
I mean, the thing that comes to top of mind really, I think is personalization. I think we will see more of it because of things like AI. Actually, we're almost in the age of like individualization at this point, realistically. But I think we're going to see greater expectation for experiences to be highly tailored to the audience. That's ironically what I'm talking about in my talk on Thursday here, the kind of history, the 50 years that have gone into personalization to date and what it means for us moving forwards. I think that we'll really see that accelerate over the next couple of years.
Yeah, because I think that's like you said, I mean, just culturally as a society in sort of the most broadest sense, I think we're just very used to that. We expect it, we accept it, like in the sense of, we're leaving our cookie crumbs everywhere and sort of, all those sort of things where I think there's a lot of positive benefits to it. And, I think it's still also on us to make sure we're putting guardrails and, certain things, being responsible with all that. But I think, obviously if people can just be, provided with like individualized or personalized, information across, kind of their day-to-day lives and certainly education, whether they're, wherever they are, kind of the student life cycle. I think it's just that idea of, we're only going to get better at that. It's only going to become more common. And I guess, but that is also not just like natural law. Like it is going to happen because institutional leaders are, making the decisions, investing in the tools, kind of iterating on them, improving on them. And, there's just that virtuous cycle of like, you're getting feedback, you're getting inputs, you're, just making your work better, because I think that's again just sort of the idea that you would just like buy the bright new shiny tool, set it and forget it, and like it might be doing fine, but you could always do better, and always just kind of really keeping a good hand on the wheel, I guess, of just how your institution is kind of navigating all these sort of nuances of digital transformation, and all that. So, final question: what advice would you give to other higher ed leaders navigating this moment?
If I was to kind of bring into my realm of view books, if you like, we are really driven by the challenge of what is a view book, like actually asking that fundamental question of like, okay, we understand what it's been for the last 50 years, but what could it be tomorrow? And I think inertia can be such a powerful force in HE that can prevent us from looking at what things could be. And actually just having a session where you can challenge that inertia and say, well, actually, what if we did away with that and we did something different? What would that mean? I think that can be such a powerful exercise for people to undertake. That I think there are probably many elements of HE where challenge could be healthy.
Yeah, I'm just excited, I think, to learn more about your work and kind of see it progressing forward. Because I think, that's definitely where my mind went. It's sort of just like, wow, this is great. What are the other use, just like across the board in terms of just like the content strategy where like, I've just talked with folks about like, and listened in on conversations where it's like, okay, if you were to like, be making the decision today, would you start publishing an alumni magazine or would you start doing, and some people be like, no, man, it's a waste of time, whatever. It's like, again, just use a little imagination to think a little bit more creatively about like, how would that be delivered to people? One, just sort of like the platform, the interface, but then like the personalization, all that kind of stuff. So I think, I don't know, it always feels kind of whimsical, I guess, of just like use our imagination. But like, I think we just have so many great tools and platforms at our disposal and great partners, great organizations that I think, if you are kind of like, having a meeting, having a session with your team and just literally like, really just sitting and talking about the work, versus I think sometimes it's like we're having working meetings, we're having our like weekly sort of just like check-ins, but then like other stuff sort of bleeds in. It's like, no, we're going to spend an hour and think about like our view book strategy, our magazine strategy. And like, even if it's just sort of like we're taking a little bit of a longitudinal look, but it's like, we know where we're heading and we're going to start figuring out how we're going to get there in terms of, doing more work that's going to be, just getting a better response from whatever our, constituents and stakeholders are. So, We will leave it there, though. Very much appreciate you just being willing to kind of hop in real quick for this sort of ad hoc, improvised sort of episode here. Because I just really loved what you all are doing, and your perspective on all this. So we'll have ways to connect with you and Prospectus Plus in the episode description. But yeah, just thanks for sharing all you did and taking the time out.
Thanks for having me, Dustin.
Thanks for listening to the Higher Ed Geek podcast. This show is a proud member of the Enrollify network, home to Higher Ed's largest collection of podcasts. Enrollify is where higher ed goes to grow. So be sure to check out our other podcasts, webinars, video clips, blogs, and more. Visit Enrollify.org and subscribe for all the latest details and content drops directly to your inbox. Enrollify is brought to you by Element 451, the digital workforce platform for higher ed. Learn more at element451.com.